From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined, as always, with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are you. You are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Let's start out with something just fun and easy and entirely uncomplicated. You guys like vaccines?
Fun stuff. Really an undivisive topic.
Yeah.
People just love talking about it at dinner.
They do. I think it's fair to say, without putting all of us on the spot, that we are in general fans of vaccination. It saved us as a group from a lot of nasty things, right? Like, you guys got COVID vaccines. I got a COVID vaccine. You know what I mean? I even got the little boosties, because I am a completionist.
Mad boosties. I got the one. I think I'm due for another. I need to look it up, but definitely got at least one boost.
No comment.
Okay. See, case in point.
Again, very uncomplicated dinner table conversation. But in the wake of COVID-19, vaccines yet again became the subject of massive conspiracy theories, right? And the pandemic itself has all sorts of conspiratorial things associated with it. Some of those are provably true, like the PPP loan conspiracies. That actually happened.
Mm-hmm. It was a Pokemon card. Isn't that what the P stands for in PPP? Remember that one guy? He was from Georgia. He used his money to fraudulently purchase a very, very expensive Pokemon card.
Well, there we go, man. What we see here is, in tonight's show, we're exploring another story of conspiracy and vaccination, but it's not necessarily a story the Jedi will tell you. For most Americans today, the most famous case of polio is that of former U.S. President and almost dictator Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But the story of polio starts way earlier than FDR's infection in 1921. He was 39 at the time. Here are the facts. Polio is terrifying. It doesn't matter like how cool you are. It doesn't matter if you can fight a kangaroo one-on-one. Polio is scarier.
Well, and especially with the historical association with children, you know, and the idea of polio wards and burning piles of clothes and just the virulent contagiousness of it all. You know, it really had the world standing still when it was at its peak.
Well, I think it's terrifying because it's one of those things. If you could be afraid of something big that could like cut you, right, or burn you, or something that you could see coming, like that's one type of fear. The type of fear with polio, and I think a lot of most other infectious diseases, is that it somehow gets into your system and you didn't know it got into your system, and then it takes a while. Like with polio, it takes a while, and the end result after it's done with your body could be what? Paralysis? Or worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anything from difficulty breathing to lifelong paralysis. We're talking withered limbs type stuff, or even death, right? You will possibly die from polio. And polio is the street name for a disease called poliomyelitis. Very nasty thing caused by variations of the polio virus. Like you said, Matt, it's easy to miss some kind of transference of this thing because it transfers through ingestion, and polio has a favorite part of the human body, nerves in the spinal cord and the brainstem.
Speaking of terrifying things associated with and already terrifying things, do you guys remember the device known as the iron lung?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, I guess, like a hyperbaric chamber, but it essentially was a huge saver of lives, you know, for folks that contracted polio. But I believe you had to use it for the rest of your life. Like it was literally like being on like this very kind of steampunk form of life support.
Yeah, and it was used for a lot of different things. And unless you could cure whatever the infection was, right, then you're stuck.
Yeah.
It's like somebody being on life support now, right? I mean, that's still a thing. The choice to continue someone's life on life support, knowing it would be limited to that situation, is one of the tough. That's making me emotional. It's one of the toughest things toughest choices you can be forced to make.
Well, again, and not to mention if you're considering it when it comes to a child.
Yeah, and then there's also the quality of life argument at that point. It's the iron lung may sound like a barbaric solution to a problem, but as we'll see soon, polio was much more horrific. The iron lung, as terrible as it was better than the alternative for many people. And so, okay, today, the wild, naturally occurring polio virus group, the good news is it's been virtually eradicated on every continent except Asia. As of 2020, Pakistan and Afghanistan are the only two countries where polio is still considered endemic, like very common, very prevalent, easily spread. Nigeria was on that list for a while, but thankfully it has moved off that list. We still don't know, by the way, the origin story of polio. All we know is it's been a sort of dark passenger of humanity for thousands and thousands of years.
That's right. In fact, it can be seen, or at the very least depictions of it can be seen in ancient Egyptian artwork dating back circa 1580 to 1350 BCE, showing a priest with a withered leg and using a crutch to help them walk. And experts believe that this official likely contracted the disease and for a time survived. It was then first officially described in the West in 1789 when British physician Dr. Michael Underwood addressed it as a, quote, debility of the lower extremities. But by 1789, this disease was absolutely everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was describing something that everyone knew about, and it was kind of like dysentery. Like, you may not have personally encountered it, but you knew someone, at the very least, who knew someone who died because of polio. And it's still an ongoing struggle to eradicate this virus, but it's a massive success story for humanity. I mean, like, when we talk about polio in the United States, it feels like we're talking about smallpox. You know what I mean? Like, it feels very much as though it is a disease of yesteryear. So it's tough to remember that during the early 1900s and well before, polio was one of the most feared diseases in all of the industrialized countries. Like, you would have a lot of kids because there was a non-zero chance that one of them would die due to polio. You were helpless. People didn't know how it transmitted. They knew that thousands of children in every country would get paralyzed every single year, and the doctors couldn't help you.
Well, yeah, and again, not just polio, right? Like you said, it's smallpox too. Your children could die from any number of these diseases until effective vaccinations became a thing. That really did change how human beings live and choose to have children. That's nuts to think about, that a technological medical invention could have that great an effect on all of humanity.
Mm-hmm. And then, we'll get to it, but there were vaccines that were introduced or discovered or created in the 1950s and 1960s. And so for those developed industrial countries, this made polio a containable disease. As we record this evening, polio is incurable. There is not a cure for polio. Even now in 2024, this means the condition or the disease can only be prevented or treated after you contract it. We know the first polio vaccine was developed by Dr. Hilary Kaprowski, and weird fact, it was administered almost exactly 74 years ago tonight. It was first administered on February 27th, 1950.
And the second, even more well-known vaccine was created by Jonas Salk in 1952 and was officially announced to the world on April 12th, 1955. Big deal for the human race. Yeah, exactly. But there's a little wrinkle in all of this clutch medical innovation, isn't there, Ben?
There is a series of missteps and possibly sinister events made the treatment arguably worse than the disease. And as a result, polio vaccination has led to thousands of conspiracy theories, some more plausible than others. It's also led to a continual distrust, paranoia, and fear of vaccination that continues in the modern day and has real-world consequences for everybody listening tonight. What do you say, guys? You want to take a break for a word from our sponsors, or should we dive right in?
Oh, let's take a little break. Give us some breathing room here before we get into the weeds with this pretty gnarly series of missteps.
Or our iron lungs. Here's where it gets crazy. Let's talk about it. The Cutter incident.
Yeah, I think we have to say at the top here before we get into all of this, Ben, what would you say? The treatment was arguably worse than the disease itself. We just have to say with a little caveat there, for some people that took the treatment, right? Mm-hmm. Not for everybody. And I think that's why this story is so sinister, because for most people who were going through the process, everything's fine. But just like with the chance that you have to contract polio in the wild, when you take the treatment to take care of polio, you had this same small but significant percentage that something really bad is going to happen.
Well, it didn't happen, thankfully, in the case of the rapid, approval process for COVID vaccine. But it's a similar kind of mad dash, a scramble to get something out as quickly as possible. And as we know, when that is the case, sometimes things slip through the cracks, or possibly even worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with those necessary caveats and conditions here, let's get to the story. It's 1951. Our buddy Jonas is receiving $200,000 a year just to research a vaccination or a cure for polio. And this happens due to crowdsourcing, the largest public fundraising activity ever, the March of Dimes, which I still like. I think we're all old enough to remember. You might see a little box back when more people used cash, and it was
at a Dairy Queen or something, right, at the counter. Sometimes there'd even be a fun little thing where you'd put your coin down a chute, and it would go around a little whirligig kind of thing. I guess to make it feel like a fun activity and not just, No, actually, that was something else. The March of Dimes was specifically a little thing, like a little sheet with little recessed places where you'd put your dime, if I'm not mistaken.
I remember that one, but I swear I thought
there was another thing like that.
Down.
100%. I don't know if that was, I can't say for certain if that was associated specifically with the March of Dimes. It might have been like some other thing, but very much part of my childhood memory. And is it still active, or is this not something that? Yeah, okay,
March of Dimes still exists. There's March of Babies. There's a pretty huge organization. And I want to say my parents, I know for a fact, I know this. They still donate to them every year as part of their I guess end of the year tax donations kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, do you know what I mean? A lot of families do that, where you will donate certain amounts of money to charitable organizations rather than just paying the government taxes, because you can write those off, which I would highly recommend to anybody out there that is paying too many taxes, which is all of us.
The tax write-off is sort of like the little whirligig toy, for
there it is. Oh my gosh, beautiful.
Hey, there's a fun feature.
Well, but think about that, an amazing charitable organization can take several $100s or whatever it is that the government would just take and then allocate towards missiles that misfire. I'm just joking.
It is a no-brainer.
Everything's great. Everything's great. Trident is going completely on course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, just for a quick, we do this on Ridiculous History pretty often. Just for a quick inflation calculator, $200,000 is a lot of money, but polio is a big problem. So, if one of us could do the honors, how much is $200,000 a year in 1951? What does that equate to in 2024?
$2,372,438.46.
Still a drop in the bucket when compared to military spending, but
right,
it's not insignificant.
Well, think about that amount of money to develop, a
drug, right?
Yeah, to develop a cure for a seriously dangerous, scary thing.
Doesn't it still seem kind of lowbally, though?
It seems lowball.
Yeah, okay, cool.
But that is everybody pooling, again, like dimes, and just a little amount of money that they can spare to all give at once, which I think, becomes extremely impactful when you've got crowdsourcing like that in 50 or 51?
51.
Yeah.
Why is the government not subsidizing this more?
All right, we'll take questions at the end.
Fair.
I'm kidding. That's what they would have said, though.
Yeah, I totally saw that as like the
next question, please.
Not concern us.
Yes. We have no time for your difficult queries.
Exactly. So by this time in the early 1950s, there were like 59,000 cases of polio every single year in the U.S. alone. And in 1952, the U.S. encountered the worst outbreak of polio on its record. 57,000 people were infected, but again, it's the dark lottery, right? You're rolling the dice. So you don't know whether these people are going to be paralyzed, whether they're going to survive relatively unscathed, or whether they're going to die. And in 1952, 21,000 people got paralyzed.
Whoa, 21,000?
Many of them children.
And the U.S. population at that time is about 153 million, which, again, it doesn't seem like that many people when you think about the overall population, but it really is. I mean, what is that percentage? How many did you say, Ben?
21,000.
All right, this equals... Okay, that's actually a really low... That's what? 1, 2... It's like less than 1%? 0.01... 1.4% of the population.
To your point, though, Matt, it's less so maybe impressive, impressive is the wrong word, as a proportion of the population, but that's a lot of human beings.
Yes.
If you laid them out in a line visually.
Oh, my God.
That's shocking. I mean, come on.
Right.
Yeah.
3,145 people died that year of polio.
See, and what I'm trying to do is put my mind into like a policymaker, right? Or a lawmaker that hasn't been affected by this disease, right? And you look at those numbers on the paper and you're like, oh, well, this isn't more concerning than these 12 things that I've got on my priorities list.
Right.
But that's why when when you have something like the March of Dimes, and wasn't Roosevelt involved with FDR involved with that? So when you've got a public figure that then is going through it publicly, right? But except not publicly, because they were taking great pains to like hide his what he was going through. Isn't that correct too? That you guys didn't you do an episode on that? I feel like we've had that conversation. Just the great pains that the government took to hide FDR's bodily changes.
There was also, to contextualize that, there was also a far higher degree of prejudice against people who had disabilities or handicaps. So it was still like the days when they would hide folks in attics and so on.
So again, like we're just kind of, I think we're trying to paint a picture here of like what it would have felt like to be going through this and what it would have looked like from way above in the 40,000 foot view of policymakers.
Yeah. The issue was that this disease was striking pretty much regardless of socioeconomic demographic, right? So anyone could get the smoke, unfortunately, and the stakes therefore became inexpressibly high. Uncle Sam opened the wallet and begged Jonas Salk to save the nation. And like you were saying, Noel, the scale of this research and this rollout was unprecedented, both in terms of the amount of money thrown at it and that accelerated timeline. So like what we say, 1951, he's getting 200 grand or like 2.3 million today. By 1954, his vaccine is ready for a clinical trial. And so the U.S. government gets 1.8 million children into this clinical trial.
Wow.
And they didn't all get the vaccine because that's not how science works.
No, like, you got to have a control, right? Did they just give a bunch of the kids nothing or saline solution or something?
Well, I like to hope that a couple of them just got like a cookie or, like something pleasant. 420,000 got the actual vaccine. 200,000 got a placebo. 1.2 million got nothing. They were the control group.
Okay, yeah, but they're all enrolled, so they're being monitored and tracked, right?
Right.
Okay. Do we know if, I can't remember, Ben, is this early the Salk vaccine, is this the one that is oral, or is this the one that's like you puncture the arm and then the substance goes into the like wound?
It was a very different time. What you had to do is grease up a hand and rub the armpit of the kid.
Wait, what?
I'm lying.
Okay, no, I'm serious. I don't know the Jonas Salk vaccine. Like, maybe it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to imagine what those actual little kids, 420,000 children had to experience. Yeah.
I believe it would be injection.
Okay.
So the big part is that the vaccine, it was a gamble to roll this out. The vaccine actually worked. And because it appeared to have efficacy, which it did, there was a lot of political pressure. And literally the day after the results came in, the government greenlit it. And so for 2 hectic weeks, 5 different companies went into overdrive and made about 5 million doses. And then about 13 days after the first doses hit the field, there were reports of polio in children who had been immunized.
Oh my gosh. That's horrifying. It is through an injection. You were correct, Ben. Like a shot, right? The way we get shots these days. When I'm thinking about this before we even get into it, I'm imagining that some of those children who were in the control may have already contracted polio before they got a vaccine.
Quite possibly.
And I don't know how you could ever control for that or even know if polio was already moving through a system through the gut, right? Because that's the way it goes. You ingest it and it goes down into your cells that are in your stomach and your intestines. Mm-hmm. I just don't know the science behind it. If you could even tell if somebody had it already in the early stages.
Yeah, it does sound 40,000 foot view and kind of brutal to put it this way, but it was necessary to include more than 1 million children with no intervention, such that you could build a snapshot of what happens without it. So the idea that some of those children would have already contracted polio is baked into the concept.
Hey.
Yeah. Well, so people panic, they freak out. This is an incredibly evil version of like taking aspirin to cure a headache and getting a migraine, right?
Yeah. Or much more, even more unfortunate, let's say.
Yeah, even worse. And so people immediately dig in and they find that all of the initial cases of polio infection via vaccine, all of those people received a vaccine manufactured by one company, Cutter Laboratories, Cutter, not Qatar.
So, after all was said and done, at least 220,000 people were infected with a live polio virus contained in Cutter's vaccine, and that included 100,000 contacts of immunized children.
So let's just talk about that. Why is it a big deal that it's live polio virus? In our discussions previously about vaccinations, one of the methods to create a workable vaccine that will actually prevent you from getting a disease is to use let's say dead virus, pieces of the genetic material of a virus, inject that into you so your body and your immune system recognizes it as a threat. So when it then sees the real polio virus come through, it knows to fight it, right?
Yeah, picture your immune system going to a gun range, right? So the idea is that a vaccination contains a de-weaponized version of a virus, right? A snake without the fangs. And so it's as though they have a copy of the virus close enough to the actual threat that it may as well be a target in the gun range, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a bunch of deactivated Terminators, right? And they're firing at the deactivated
and they're
Terminators.
Just popping up like that amazing Larry David sketch from Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
But it does still make you sick, though. It can. I know that some people, when they get a vaccination, it can be very similar symptoms to the actual condition they're being vaccinated against.
But generally, you're not going to get the actual thing that you're being vaccinated for. Unless there's some kind of mess up, like in this situation at the, what is it called? Cutter Laboratories? Cutter
Labs, yeah.
From California.
Yes. I still remember that salsa commercial. So, all right. Yeah. So, unfortunately, as a direct result of these vaccinations, 70,000 victims developed muscle weakness. 164 were severely paralyzed, like iron lung level, and then 10 died that we know of. The question is, what happened? How could a vaccine spread the very same disease it was created to prevent? How could the aspirin be the source of your headache? Here's what went wrong. I guess we should talk about Cutter Pharmaceutical Company. For anyone playing along at home, they were later purchased by the pharmaceutical conglomerate Bayer.
As are most medical or pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah, it would seem so. And so they started out as a lab, like doing research, and then I guess they parlayed that research into a full-blown pharmaceutical company.
Yes, yeah, you're absolutely correct. In 1897, they started, and in their early days, they quickly got involved with swine fever, cholera, anthrax. To be clear, they got involved with attempting to prevent those.
Yeah.
Potato.
They weren't just writing letters to congressmen with some substance inside it.
Swine fever was the new NFT, right?
Yeah.
So, all right.
God, even before the flu, we had the fever, right?
There we go.
Swine related.
So there's this rush for this polio treatment. Lives are on the line. No one knows how to prevent it. And if you ask the average American at this time, what scares them the most is that it could be their kid. It could be their kid tomorrow. They have no idea how to prevent it.
It's an astonishing situation. Really imagine in 2019, 2020, when there was such a public outcry, like, get these vaccines ready now. Hurry up, get these vaccines ready now. That was happening then with polio because there was such public fear.
Well, and with COVID, it was more like this could be my parents or grandparents. Right? Yeah. But then, it's just like times 10x that. That's redundant, but you get what I'm saying. When it comes to children, my children, largely COVID-19, it affected all kinds of people, but the folks that were experiencing the largest numbers of fatalities were, by and large, older folks.
But I would just say I had a 4-year-old at the time. He's 8 years old, thank goodness, and sitting over there playing Minecraft right now. But like that, the fear for me
was big,
what we don't know what's going to happen if my child gets this because I got it, right? And you just, again, I think the same thing's happening with polio because if you accidentally, as an adult, ingest some of it accidentally, then you're cooking for your child. It's over, right?
Right. Very much so. And with this massive rush to treat this condition, right, to propagate a preventative measure, some batches of the Cutter-produced vaccine, they passed standard safety test, which meant they had just the targets instead of the actual enemies. And the problem was they still carried live polio. So the thousands and thousands of people were injected with the disease that they were attempting to avoid.
Ugh.
They were given the disease, which differs from Tuskegee. To be clear, the Tuskegee syphilis experiments were a conspiracy on the part of the U.S. government to pretend to treat syphilis and not actually do anything and watch people slowly die. This is different because the disease is actively being inserted into human bodies.
Well, and the big question you may have right now as you're hearing all of this is, well, did that pharmaceutical company know that they were injecting people with a live polio virus, or was it an accident?
Well, that's where the conspiracy stuff comes from, right? Did they know? Was this intentional? Was this designed to cull a portion of the population? That's where the conspiratorial mind kind of leaps to, right?
100%. And we can answer that quickly. First, before we answer it, we have to give a big shout out to two people. Jonas Salk already got enough attention, right? He did a good job. He earned it. Shout out to you. Someone who doesn't get enough recognition here is Bernice E. Eddy, E-D-D-Y. In the mid-1950s, Eddy is a scientist at the National Institutes, plural, of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. And Eddy is doing a routine safety test on a batch of these Cutter vaccines. And just to be very clear, folks, they were testing on primates. And as a result, Eddy notices, hey, this vaccine we gave to a monkey, to several monkeys, has actually given the monkeys polio. And there's a great Washington Post article that talks about this. She finds that 3 of the 6 samples she's testing have paralyzed the monkeys. And she asked a colleague, what do you think's wrong with the monkeys? And the guy looks at him and he's like, oh, well, they have polio, obviously. And, we got to give some of them polio. We got to figure out what's going on. She's like, no, we gave these monkeys the vaccine. And then they have that Christmas story moment where the kid finally says the F word. They're looking at each other and they're going,
fudge.
Oh, fudge.
Yeah. What did we do? Or what happened? How did this happen? What's going on? Because we're giving people this stuff. And do you mind if we shout out that article really quickly, Ben, that you're pulling from right there? Because it's really good.
I'm citing the Tainted Polio vaccine that sickened and fatally paralyzed children in 1955, published in April 2020 by Michael E. Rowing.
You can read that one for free online from the National Library of Medicine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of attention on this now, right? And at least part of that is, as we'll find, it's due to the beat-by-beat story progression of COVID vaccine conspiracies. There's another guy we should shout out, Paul A. Offit, director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and author of the best book about the Cutter incident. Spoiler, it is titled The Cutter Incident.
Subtitle, How America's First Polio Vaccine Led to the Growing Vaccine Crisis.
Yeah, 120,000 children got this tainted vaccine, and they became a part of what Offit describes as, quote, one of the worst biological disasters in American history, a man-made polio epidemic.
No, thank you.
I mean, and it's weird, too, because for some folks in the crowd tonight, you might say, well, that's what you get for trusting these authority figures on the basis of their authority, right? You have to understand, though, that at this time, the atomic bomb still had a frightening new car smell to it. And if you asked Americans, as Offit cites, if you asked Americans at this moment in history, what their top fears were. The atomic bomb was number 1. Polio was number 2.
Well, yeah, and think about the other types of fears that would stoke that one. Like, oh, is this some kind of disease that the Soviet Union is trying to infiltrate the ranks of our children with somehow?
The not knowing
like through the
of
schools?
It.
Or
yeah.
It's like that the fear is very real.
Mm-hmm. It even got the president, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Once upon a time. So that is front of mind in the American zeitgeist. And just like we said with COVID-19, people weren't sure how it transmitted originally. They became increasingly paranoid. What I like about Offit's book is that he draws these comparisons very well. He says, people were wearing masks, they were wearing gloves. They were afraid to go to the grocery store and touch fruit in the produce section.
That
which also, by
familiar.
the way, also you should wash the produce if you can.
I remember when people were like getting their groceries and leaving them in their garage for a couple of days. And
yes,
they were just like, again, I'm sorry to repeat myself, but just the not knowing of it all. Something so novel, literally was in the name of our virus, the coronavirus. It just breeds so much like paranoia, and it's like I'll do anything. Matt, to your earlier point about how it's not like a knife or a punch or something you can dodge or duck or guard yourself against. Therefore, everything becomes a candidate for like this invisible kind of assailant, for it to get into you, and it can really breed some very serious mental health issues. In addition to, God forbid, if you actually get the illness.
Well, yeah, with a contractable disease, every other human being you interact with is a potential infection point, right? Unless somehow that person has been vaccinated and is immune, right? So now that person is safe. And then if you've gotten it, oh wait, now I'm safe and I can be a safe person for other people. You can see psychologically the thing you're describing there, guys, is like, the vaccine, it becomes a mental cure almost not more than the same way it becomes a physical prevention.
There's some symbolism to it, right? Mm-hmm. There's some psyop aspects for sure. I mean, look, it's the 1950s, a ton of people acting in good faith, vaccinated their kids, and they got polio as a result. And it should be no surprise that conspiracy theories take wing span. That's for almost immediately. The questions are thriving because there's a lack of transparency at this point. Could the U.S. government really have just screwed up such an important job? Could there be another goal behind these vaccinations? What if, people asked, this was somehow by design? I suggest we take a break for a word from our sponsors, Cutter Laboratories.
No.
I'm kidding. Can we keep that in? No?
Absolutely. Yeah.
QATAR?
Yes. The nation of Cutter, our number one supporter. All right. Keep it all in, Paul. All right. And we've returned. There's this aftermath, and to the credit of the U.S. government, the response was pretty immediate. Like, they're freaking out too, because they are also human. They also have children. They also don't want anyone they care about to have polio.
Right. And the Surgeon General's office pulls immediately all of these vaccines produced by Cutter. But unfortunately, as you may imagine, the damage had largely already been done. And subsequent research would show polio vaccines that were manufactured by Eli Lilly, Park Davis, Pittman Moore, and Wyeth may also have paralyzed some children. This is not very good for public opinion and morale in general, especially after the bait and the switch of it all. You're already, like, again, living in these very paranoid conditions, and then you have this golden kind of parachute extended to you, only to realize that it has a giant hole in it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The public opinion pulls a 180 pretty much overnight.
Dude, the Surgeon General. What a title. What an interesting thing to be in charge of. It was Leonard A. Scheele, Scheele. There's a huge list online of all the Surgeon Generals, and I don't know any of them.
I think most people don't.
But it's such a cool, I don't know, it's such a cool position. It seems really important.
It sounds like a Dungeons and Dragons class.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
like
Surgeon and the General?
Yeah, his buffs are crazy. But people went from eagerly supporting vaccination, extolling the virtues, exhorting each other to get vaccinated. They went to believing it would actually kill them to encounter not only this vaccination, but anybody who had received it. And to their credit, they were not wingnuts. They were not unintelligent people. They knew that this vaccine in this situation gave people the disease it purported to prevent.
That's right. And it just goes to show how one mistake of this proportion, with such public results can result in decades and decades of distrust. Like, to claw that credibility back, you could argue it's still, for some, it's not back.
It's easier to close a door than to open one, for sure.
Do you guys think there's anything to the nature of a patented vaccine that's produced by a private company that is like the unseen nature of that, especially in something that's an injectable like this, where you don't know what it is. You know that this company controls it. You watch it come out in a needle that then just goes into your arm, and you have to trust that whatever's in that needle is going to be helpful for you. Mm-hmm. And it's going to, rather than hurt you, rather than, I don't know, some kind of, I'm trying to think of I don't know what the good comparison would be, but something that you could look at and go, okay, there's no mold on this. This looks fresh. This looks like the way the tomato should look. It smells like a tomato. Okay, it's good. I can eat that. I'm going to be okay. But it's this weird patented chemically thing that just gets shot into your arm.
I mean, heck, even, how some with the epidemic of, say, tainted street drugs, there are at the very least kits that people can use to test their drugs.
Oh, interesting.
They're illegal drugs because they've been around a long time. So you can put a little whatever. I don't know how it works, but put a little drop of something on it and see if it's pure or if it's got some adulterant in it. This is a thing that's so new. There's no test for it. There's no way. You just have to trust it.
And then if there were some sort of testing kit for your vaccine, then who would manufacture that?
That's right.
You know what I mean? Like, that's also
Nestle.
the same.
Then you need a test for the test.
Then you need a test for the test of the test. Maybe we're in the wrong business, because I think we just figured out
should design test
amazing
tests.
grift. So it's a who watches the Watchmen situation.
It sure is.
And so as a result of this absolute disaster, there are something like 60 lawsuits, which Offit traces in detail. And the very first creates a judicial precedent that continues in the West today. It's the idea of liability without fault, which I know sounds very boring. And it's something that doesn't really happen to human individuals, but it does happen to corporations. They said, look, Cutter Laboratories was not negligent in their production of the vaccine, but they had violated public trust because people believed it was safe. Sort of like when you go on an airplane and you just kind of assume the thing's going to land the way they told you it was going to land.
It is kind of weird when you really start to think of how just living, in the world, you have to trust so many systems, and how the erosion of that trust, whether for good reason or not, really prevents you from kind of living a normal life and can really lead to some serious difficulties, just like, in getting around or in, being healthy, and there's people that really go down those rabbit holes of distrust. And again, it is sometimes for good reason, but is it trusting blindly? Or is it just deciding that I'm not going to live in fear? I think there's I don't know. The smart move is somewhere in between those two.
Yeah, the best way to describe human existence is probably like a non-consensual group project. You know what I mean? No one signed up for it. No one decided to be born on purpose for a thing. And you just sort of get this group and you're like, oh gosh, I hope there aren't too many problems today.
I was trying to come up with a sound that would encapsulate the human experience. And
it's the Curb Your Enthusiasm soundtrack.
Or the sad trombone.
This is my pitch. Ready?
All right, go.
Wow.
Perfect. Okay. Cut. Yeah. Yeah. Nailed it. There's like poetry.
Immediate awe, and then just goes downhill from there.
You're right. And that's what we see here. This concept of liability without fault. It sounds boring. It's very important because it means that companies can be held responsible for the effects of the things they create and sell, even if they were not negligent in their design and manufacture. And this gets us to a different conversation about pharmaceuticals, about, firearms, all the fun stuff. But what we see here is a standing case of disaster. It affects absolutely everyone listening in the modern day. Spoiler, even if you have never been to the U.S. and you never plan to visit, it's the worst vaccine disaster in U.S. history. And I think there are like three big consequences. The first one, innocent people died. And they died because they trusted a group of powerful people who made some terrible mistakes. I don't think there's a conspiracy. I don't think they did it on purpose. Like to the earlier point you guys made, if you wanted to kill a lot of people in this manner, then why didn't all the vaccines kill them?
No, you're absolutely right. And a lot of people didn't die. Like most
that'd be too
people
obvious.
didn't die, but they got paralyzed.
It's true, though. I mean, that's also, we have some fellow conspiracy realists listening this evening who may be partially or fully paralyzed, right? And
there are certainly still people alive today that are still, dealing with the aftermath of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, history is way closer than it looks in the rearview mirror, right? The second consequence, or to sum up the first one, it does not seem like there is proof of a grand conspiracy. It seems the truth is even more frightening. People got in a hurry, and as a result of moving from fear and being in a hurry, they messed up.
And social pressure, right?
Yes.
It's that like time plus pressure equals you make mistakes. And if you don't have a governing body or some kind of regulatory organization or third party that is going behind you and checking your work, then you can make a mistake like this.
And maybe you should listen to scientists, because human history is just rife with scientists and experts raising their hands and saying, hey, wait, you know what I mean? Shout out Semmelweis. They should not have killed that guy.
Think about it as, I agree, by the way, but imagine it as like a moon mission or something. Like there's so much pressure to do it. You got a ton of smart people working on the problem, but nobody checks any of the work. So they just kind of go with it and just, oh, wait, whoops, we missed by like a lot. Dang.
The rocket's taking off and someone's like, wait, did anyone put glass in the windows?
but that's one of the, I mean, like stress testing a product, anything like this, a plan, a strategy. It's one of the most important parts of a plan or a strategy, right? Is to test it out and see how it functions and test an end product. And it does feel like that, for my money, that was the mistake in this instance.
Yeah, I think that leads us to the second consequence, which is Americans increasingly distrusted their government. And a healthy skepticism of authority is inherent to the American experiment, but this distrust as valid as it was, because again, those people got polio. There's no way around it. As valid as it was, this distrust has directly resulted in the loss of further life. That leads us to the third consequence. Polio survived. It's real. We cannot overemphasize how much that sucks.
Yeah. It was pretty much gone. Pretty much. Yeah. And again, statistically, it was gone for almost all of the Western world, most of the world. Were there only a couple of places, Asia, and for a while, was it Nigeria?
Yeah.
But is that because it's really resilient, or it just wasn't actually fully eradicated? It kind of hung out dormant and then said, ha, I'm back.
There are a couple of reasons. Unfortunately, the fumbles here are man-made. In Nigeria, for a long time, one of the most prevalent conspiracy theories was that people were being sterilized through vaccination. And they were like, the idea is, hey, these Western groups, these NGOs are pretending to help you, but what they're really trying to do is depopulate your country.
So a bunch of people don't get the vaccination, so then herd immunity is lessened or gone, and then people get infected again, and just cycle.
And this is something to your points. Right now, if you're looking at the largest polio populations, you're going to find them in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And there are a lot of factors to it, like you just described, Matt. But one of the most intriguing factors is, yet again, the U.S. messed up. And they messed up very bad in this one. You guys know, or you've heard of this, right?
I don't know much about this thing. Tell me about this. I do not know.
No, I don't think so either.
All right. So there's this guy named Osama bin Laden. He's a real POS. He's kind of a pill.
Is he a jerk?
I would say so. Yeah. I hope that's not a hot take, but I don't care for him. You know? So there's this global search for OBL, for Osama bin Laden, and that's in itself, that's a story for another evening, right? Because, all right, I know Matt's art, for everybody listening, Matt just like arced one eyebrow as like, is now the time? Is it today?
Let's do it. Get the stealth helicopter, guys.
And then just throw the body in the ocean, whatever. The CIA launched, this is true, the CIA launched a fake hepatitis B vaccination grift to collect DNA in the neighborhood that they believed was harboring OBL. And they were saying, obviously, you know, bin Laden's not going to come out and get his Hep B vax, but maybe one of his family members will. This operation absolutely failed on multiple fronts. First, it didn't do what they wanted. That's not the reason they found, quote unquote, found Osama bin Laden. The worst consequence of this is that it absolutely wrecked any non-Western trust in Western vaccines. Like, they faked a vaccine program to find and kill a person.
Mm-hmm. It's really so short-sighted. You could have done an actual vaccination program.
You could have also done that part. You could have helped people.
Yeah. And you still had the same result. Whatever.
Leslie F. Roberts from Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health, real thing. Professor Roberts said, forevermore, people would say this disease, meaning polio, this crippled child, is because the U.S. was so crazy to get Osama bin Laden. So now, in parts of the world where polio is endemic, it is blamed upon Western governments.
Dude, and there's this whole other thing that we haven't even talked about, and we're already, we're an hour in this episode almost. The SV40 thing. What is it, Ben? Simian virus something. What is it?
Yeah, SV40, simian virus 40. It is There is a long-running concern, you could say suspicion, you could say conspiracy theory, that SV40 gives people cancer, and that if someone is receiving polio vaccines contaminated with this monkey virus, specifically between 1955 and 1963, that it led to a much higher rate of contracting cancer. So the argument is similar to like, was it asbestos and mesothelioma, or lead and crime?
But it is weird because it's one of these things that you'll find on fact-checking websites, and places like the AP News will put out a special, you can find one right now, a special fact-checking article about this, because there's some parts that are true. SV40, this simian virus, is used, constituent parts of it are used to build things or components of a vaccine, several vaccines, and this virus does cause cancer in rodents in laboratory settings.
Mm-hmm.
But the same scientists running those experiments and those trials also find that it doesn't seem to cause cancer in humans.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all like, it becomes muddled, especially for somebody like me that doesn't have a medical background, that is just kind of going off the medical terminology that's written in these like places online. They're like, okay, I think I understand what you're saying. This still feels a little creepy to me.
Yeah, especially the virus itself in like the rhesus monkey. It's an infection that doesn't give them cancer.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly. I don't know.
I
think the uncertainty that we always talk about, Ben, the uncertainty is the scary thing at all times.
Yeah, it's true. I think you're on the money with that. There is much more to the story. SV40, we had to mention it. As you can tell, we are not medical professionals. Nothing in this podcast should be taken as medical advice. Had to get that one in there, right, guys?
Thank you.
Does that CYAS?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. We also haven't talked about the Russian disinfo campaigns surrounding COVID-19, another story for another time. But there is some good news. As we were going in to record this evening, this very day, February 26th, 2024, the Health Ministry of Afghanistan announced a new massive polio vaccination effort. They want to protect something like 7.6 million children under the age of 5 from the endemic disease of polio. But now we have to wonder, how will this be accepted on the ground? You know, if you live in a village in Afghanistan, and then you have someone come up and say, hey, the Americans have a vaccine and they'd very much like to give it to your child.
Yeah.
What would you say?
No thanks.
Pass.
Really appreciate it, though. Really.
Pass. Yeah.
But I've realized what was happening in my brain. SV4D is triggering in my head like Call of Duty and all these games I've played because of the SVD sniper rifle. It's the like Russian built Dragon. I don't know how to say it correctly, but it's the sniper. It's the sniper rifle that was very popular in Russia or USSR for a long time. But it's called SVD. So when you say SV4D, you just put a little 4 in between there. Sorry, off. Just
it made me think of WD-40 because I am woefully uninformed about most things. I don't know whether you can use it as an engine lubricant. You probably shouldn't. You should probably just not have primate viruses on hand.
Yeah. The one thing I know about WD-40, and it says it on all the bottles, is that it's penetrating, and I just feel uncomfortable with that.
It's definitely a choice. It's definitely a choice on their end. So what do we think, guys? Is this a conversation that continues? It feels like we gave ourselves some homework for some future episodes. I know it's, again, like we said at the top, it's a very simple, uncomplicated subject, vaccination. What do we want to hear from our fellow conspiracy realist?
I want people, if this is okay, this is one thing. I want people to check out the CDC's article. It's actually maybe just a landing page titled Historical Vaccine Safety Concerns. And it's got a list with a pull-down menu of things like the Cutter incident, the SV40 simian virus incident, the swine flu vaccine, and how do you say that? Guillain-Barré syndrome. I mean, it's everything. It's got all the concerns into one, like set up in one spot. I want to know what people's concerns are for real about this stuff. And then also, like, what are you doing to protect yourself and your family and everybody around you in your neighborhood, in your state, because getting a vaccine to me still feels like the right thing. Even though I feel some type of way about it at times. I don't know. How are you dealing with that if you're listening to this?
What about you, Noel?
I mean, look, I think I've mentioned before on the show that, when we got our kid vaccinated early on, there were a few that I think we delayed. Didn't do them all in one go because there's some sources that we were reading up on, my kid's mom and I, that were just indicating that pumping all of that in one fell swoop could be a little much for such a small system, But that's about as far as I've ever gone in terms of like distrusting any of the medical science, especially after such a long time, with the basic kind of vaccinations that are required for, your child being able to attend school. And then after a point with the COVID stuff, yeah, we've all gotten it. I'd like to live my life with some degree of trust of medical science. I know healthcare in the United States isn't always what it's cracked up to be, but I would like to think that at the heart of it is the desire to help people and that no one's trying to feed us any secret microchips or 5G or anything like that. It's too much for me to choose to live my life, looking for the conspiracy and stuff like that. I don't know.
I would like to hear from our listeners, folks, everything that the guys just described there. I'd also like to hear what you would keep in a bunker, and would love to hear your opinions on the 1988 cinematic masterpiece Vibes, starring Jeff Goldblum and Cyndi Lauper. Tell us your thoughts, on Vibes, but also on the other stuff from this episode. Tell us if we should do an episode on OBL. Talking to some tourists out there, if you are able to give us the scoop or the skinny, then we try to be easy to find online.
That's right. You can find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook, where you can find our Facebook group. Here's where it gets crazy. We also exist at that handle on X, FKA Twitter, as well as YouTube, where we roll out new video content every single week. You can find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff Show on Instagram and TikTok.
Hey, we have a phone number. Why don't you give us a call? It's 1-833-STDWYTK. Let us know if you're going to take a tactical hammer or a tactical hatchet into the bunker with you. I love that idea of you get one or the other and that's it.
That's so weird.
Good luck.
Also, just on that poll for anybody playing along at home on our social media, we owe a great deal of thanks to our pals Erica and West over at Station 16. They did not include the number one thing you should have when you're thinking about bunkers, which is a secondary backup bunker.
Oh, I thought you were going to say
that was your first question, Ben.
Paper.
You're like primary or secondary when it came to the bunker question.
You gotta have two.
You gotta have
Is
two.
it a bunker inside the other bunker or below the primary bunker?
Nice try.
Yeah, narc.
Right.
Get out of my bunker.
Call our number. Tell us about your bunker, and tell us where yours is so we can come hang out. Just kidding. Don't give out information like that. If you don't want to do that, why not instead send us a good old fashioned email? We are
the folks who read every single email we get. Give us the links, give us the pictures, give us the context. We love hearing from you. Shout out to Papa Caps.
Oh, yeah. With that, what is it? I can't remember the name of the sweet, super spicy hot sauce he makes up there in Illinois.
It was a ghosty, right? Or some flavor of maybe a variety of the ghost pepper?
We're going to find out.
We sure will.
We'll find out together. Also, just to get in front of it, the Larry David SNL clip we mentioned earlier is FBI Simulator featuring Larry David as Kevin Roberts. Please do check it out.
Perfect.
Yeah. And while you're checking that out, that means you're probably online. So finally getting to the end, send us an email, conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.